of the U.S. Air Force, General David Allvin, Commander of the Army Futures Command, General James Rainey, and Vice Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Jim Kilby, for a discussion on the future of American military power, moderated by Dr. Nadia Schadlow, a member of the SCSP Board of Advisors and Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute.
Well, I'd like to welcome everyone this morning. I have the privilege of being on stage with 4 representatives of our military services, 4 out of 5. We're really glad to be here this morning. All of these leaders are at the forefront of ensuring that our military has the capabilities and the training it needs to meet the challenges we're facing. And there's certainly a lot of geopolitical challenges out there that we're facing today. The current wars across Europe and the Middle East are revealing things about the character of war that I'd like to ask all these service leaders about, and then we'll move into some specific questions about their services and about how they're seeing the future of their services as well as the joint force. So really, it's a privilege to be here. First, I'll turn to General Smith, and we'll work our way down to tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the world today and how you see the character of warfare evolving, given what we're seeing in the Middle East, in Asia, and in Europe.
Yeah, thanks for the question. What I would say is that if you can be sensed, you can be targeted, and if you can be targeted, you can be killed. And so the ability to hide in plain sight, the ability to manage your signature is paramount. Long-range fires matter. The ability to deliver those long-range fires ubiquitously across the battlefield is central to the future. And again, the simple answer is if you can be sensed, you can be targeted. And if you can be targeted, you can be killed. So hiding in plain sight, being able to fuzz up your location, so to speak, at a different classification level really matters.
General Allvin?
Yeah. Thank you. And I certainly agree with the comment on those points. To me, I think about the changing character of war. One word that comes to mind is speed. So everything seems to be moving faster. The idea of speed of recognition, decision, and action, I think is going to be one of those areas where that's where you're going to find your advantage. And with speed comes the requirement for agility, because as things unfold as fast as we anticipate they are, and we're seeing those play out real time, you can't afford to be a one-trick pony. You have to have the resilience. And we're actually starting to see that in the language. We're seeing things like from kill chains to kill webs. Now we're talking about mesh networks, the ability to be able to respond from something that may happen so rapidly and still be able to come back up on step and be able to get on the positive and on the proactive rather than the reactive. And so I think fundamentally, if you look at speed and agility, those are going to be the things that are going to be privileged as the character of war changes going forward.
General Rainey?
Yeah, thank you. If I could, just a little bit, I definitely agree with both comments, especially the ubiquitous sensing coupled with precision guidance munitions, near peer competitors. What I like to point out, I get asked this a lot, obviously, what's not changing is really interesting also. And I would offer the fact that war is still a human endeavor, contest of will between human beings, that, the industrial age warfare didn't stop when digital, still dirty, nasty, hard business that is really an advantage for the U.S. Joint Force because people are still going to be the thing that matters. But there's indisputably the most disruptive period of time, smarter people than me have said ever, certainly since World War II. So not just the amount of disruption, but the speed. The thing we're wrestling with is even if you figured something out today, it's not going to be relevant. So I'd just build on the speed, not just of warfare, but also of how we adapt the joint force, the Army, to be ready next time we're contested.
Admiral Kilby?
I just add to what everyone said, which I think is important to try to put in a different view here, is the ability to learn from what is happening, sensing in real time, and provide that back to the folks at the end of the spear there. So an example for us in the Red Sea is we have an ability now and have kind of perfected that to take data extraction from our combat systems, send them back, analyze that data from a perspective of combat system efficacy. Did the combat system do what we think it was supposed to do? And did the human beings operating that combat system do what we thought they should do? And if either one of those is no, we can turn a patch to software quickly, or we can go back and address that human piece for everyone who's out there. So the learning aspect of this, I think, is critical. I don't know that that's new, but doing it with speed is something that we're focused on.
So that's one of the themes, and all of you have mentioned speed and agility. What are some of the obstacles that you're seeing in your services or the department as a whole that are really preventing you from acting as fast as you'd like to, or getting your services to be able to respond as quickly as you'd like to? What are obstacles that you would like to see removed, or how do you approach that problem actually operationally? General Allvin?
Well, I think this is a journey, and I think part of it is our relationship with industry. When we think about how the strategic environment has changed really since the end of the Cold War, I mean, there are some seminal moments that happened there when we think about sort of the Last Supper in 1993 with Secretary Aspen and Deputy Sec Perry. That was a pretty pivotal moment, because from that point forward, our relationship with industry was one that was almost more optimizing for efficiency. And we saw that not only in the mergers and acquisitions that followed, but also in the down the chain of not only the big companies, but the subs and the subcontractors. It became about efficiency. And that was also the way we did with logistics. And that was what we needed to do, because that's what the country demanded, and the environment didn't demand anything different. So the ability to pivot from that, a very entrenched and for its time successful way of doing business, is something that has crept into our Air Force as well, that we're trying to push away from, to be able to have a better relationship with industry where we can turn innovation and ideas into fielded capabilities more rapidly. And I think that is where it starts. When you can't take advantage of the fleeting and frequent technological advantages in front of you, that's where you fall behind as an institution.
Thanks. General Smith?
Well, what I would say is on-time funding matters. And this is not a shot at Congress, but I guess it is. We have to have on-time funding, because when you don't, you're operating at last year's model in this year's world, and that doesn't work. Inflation continues, and industry partners need funding. They need DoD dollars to produce the things that they're designed to produce for us. And so, the things that Dr. Carter built, DIUX, become less important when they're great ideas that are then adopted by the services or unfunded for a year at a time. We had year-long continuing resolutions. And again, you can't operate on today's times and yesterday's dollars.
Thanks. So, General Rainey?
Yeah, I think every single part of the process that was designed for, good reasons, it needs to be looked at. I mean, we have to be able to go faster. We have to be able to adapt to new technologies. I think we should be working on building that muscle memory now, because we're certainly going to need it when we go to war. We're not going to get it exactly right. And even if we do, the enemy's going to be good. And so this ability to see it first, understand it first, and adapt faster. I'll speak for myself. We got to get better at writing requirement documents. Everybody likes to point fingers, but we have to move to capability-based requirements documents that unlock the potential of industry. The more clearly I explain what I'm looking for, with the less words, the better response we get out of industry. So that would be one recommendation.
And as we were speaking backstage a little bit, some of these requirements documents are 1,000 pages or hundreds and hundreds of pages, which is usually a sign that it's the opposite probably of what we need.
There's a little bit of urban legend in that. When the Army stood up Army Futures Command about 6 years ago, it was designed, and a big part of the success we're having is we've written clear, concise, usable requirement documents. But yeah, you have to keep working on it.
Great.
I just think it can't be linear. We can't write a requirement, hand it to our great teammates in the acquisition world. It's got to be iterative.
So now I'd like to turn to each of you to tell us a little bit about some of the developments in your service. And General Smith, can you tell us a little bit about Force Design 2030 and what its key elements are, what you're most proud of in it, and what you still think needs some work?
Yeah, Force Design 2030 is what we call the righteous destination. It is changing the Marine Corps to be able to operate in a disaggregated manner in the Indo-Pacific, but viable and valuable in all theaters, to be able to sense and make sense what's happening, and to be able to target from shore to sea, to be able to use hypersonic missiles to target adversary warships, to close down SLOCs, and be a partner to the U.S. Navy. So Force Design is about modernizing the Marine Corps and about for the pacing threat that's been designated in the National Defense Strategy, which is China. And then all other potential adversaries are lesser included offenses. So the key for us is being able to sense, make sense, and take action against an adversary like the PRC in a disaggregated manner.
Thank you. General Allvin, can you tell us a little bit about the Air Force's recently released document on great power competition and how it discusses the Air Force's role in that, and again, what you're most proud of in the document and what continues to need some work?
Yeah, thank you for that. The effort that we're undertaking for reoptimizing for great power competition, it's comprehensive. It is going to be close to all-consuming, but we may not see as much in public as maybe some of the other ones. But here's what we discovered. You know, when Secretary Kendall first came in, he had introduced these things called operational imperatives. They were very more precise capabilities that we knew that if we didn't develop, we would lose. It wouldn't guarantee victory, but we would lose. And so those are some key capabilities we're developing. But on the heels of that, we understand that the capabilities are great, but if you don't have the institution that is optimized to be able to make maximum effect of those, then you're failing. And as we did more of this introspection, we look back across the last 30 years. And when we talk about adapting to the environment, the Air Force certainly did adapt to the environment. But that was an environment in the 90s, like, as I said, it was more about efficiency. Once 9/11 kicked off, the Joint Force didn't need what the Air Force had traditionally done in great wars of past. The Joint Force needed us to do things like on-call close air support and the golden hour to be able to retrieve the injured and bring them to a hospital where they could be saved. And all of these things, we were filling in the cracks. And so we found ourselves becoming an Air Force that was a little bit more fragmented. And so now it was more diffuse. And we still find that when we go and deploy into the Middle East, we take from several bases to go fill those deployments. Well, if you're thinking about being on the balls of your feet to be ready and deter a conflict with the PRC or fight one if you have to, that's not how you can do it. You don't do that by meeting up in theater and saying, hi, I'm Dave, I'm gonna be your commander here. You need to train as larger organizations, as larger groups, and be able to understand where the holes in your swing are. And we weren't optimized to do that either. As we developed our capabilities, we found it was the same way. We're sort of developing our Air Force in pieces. We'd build the next best fighter and then the next future mobility platform without having a single force design and thinking into the future about what the whole force was going to need to be able to do. And so what we were doing is in the areas of projecting power and generating readiness, developing our people and developing capabilities, we're really tightening up our formation, looking to be one single Air Force that has in mind a future design that is optimizing for agility, but also doing the optimization and prioritization on the readiness of larger formations to execute things like agile combat employment and those new schemes of maneuver that we need to do to keep up with the pacing challenge. Where I am most pleased about is I think we have a general consensus that this is basically the right thing to do. What I am most concerned about is time. It's time, because there is this transition period, and we know the clock is ticking for us to be able to robust our deterrence and be able to defeat. So it's time.
Thanks. Admiral Kilby, I'd like to go to you to tell us a little bit about the Navy's Integrated Battle Platform 24.1, what that's about, and again, what you like most about it and where you think it still needs work.
Integrated Battle Problem was conducted in the Pacific Fleet. It was roughly a 10-day exercise from 5 March to 15 March. and it's one of a series, and you can cut and paste that across many fleets. Fifth Fleet has done that recently. Fourth Fleet is doing it now. But it's operating with unmanned platforms and experimenting with them in a manner that we will have a more effective hybrid fleet writ large. We're looking at how to integrate those things. I know the Air Force is doing it, the Marine Corps is doing it, the Army is doing it. We're all trying to figure out how we're going to match those things in a way that's more effective now to have sensing, to General Smith's point, maybe a little more persistently than we could with manned platforms. So the integrated battle problem is about a continuum of learning. And it gets back to what I think you've heard a common theme of, adapting the requirements process, which can be fairly rigid, to have an input from that learning and a resultant. The replicator effort by the Office of Secretary of Defense is meant to field capability faster. The Navy has a thing called the Disruptive Capability Office, which is meant to shorten that development timeline, not just from a hardware perspective, but from a ConOps perspective, a concept of employment perspective, a concept of deployment perspective, to put that together in a more effective way, and maybe not try to build a huge program, but just field some capability and then build on that over time. And I think that's a much more robust model, all fed by these experimentation opportunities.
Thank you. General Rainey, tell us a little bit about Army Futures Command. I know you're looking at the Army of 2040, but also the Army of 2030, just 6 years away. How is the Army doing on delivering that Army? What does that Army look like, and what do you wish you could do faster?
Yeah, thank you. And not just to state the obvious, you only have one Army,
Right.
So the dates are, somewhat useful for some of the processes, but really what we're trying to do is continuously transform the Army. And our chief, General George, has put a strong emphasis on what we refer to as transforming in contact. So inside 2 years, getting better tomorrow than you are today, better next year. We're doing that with our joint teammates, fielding the capabilities that we're seeing be effective in the battles that are going on around the world. We kind of got a moral responsibility, we think, to learn from that. So autonomous systems, non-kinetic counter-UAS, electronic warfare is, right at the top of the most disruptive things, and fixing our networks that we have now. And then there's a deliberate transformation period of time, roughly aligned with the FIDEP. So in there you have signature modernization efforts, some of the things that AFC and really the Army has been working on for 6 years now. Some of our signature modernization efforts. And then there's the deeper, second, third FIDEP, so kind of that decade from about 30 to 40, which is where things are going to be really, really disruptive, in my opinion. And it's also the place where you could make some really dramatic transitions or transformations of the Army.
What will be some of those disruptions or some of the things you're concerned about?
Yeah, I think if we move to truly data-centric warfare, not connecting stuff, everything going on right now is great, and I applaud things like CJADC2, all the services, but the real opportunity to genuinely move to data-centric warfare, software over hardware, where you don't have to go out looking for the data. It's all in a place that's usable and accessible. Then you can really bring the power of things like AI, machine learning to bear. I think there's a reascendance of fires over maneuver, which is a really big deal. It's gone back and forth in history, but for the Army, maneuvering to position fires in support of the joint force would drive some major changes in both how we build our formations and the balance between, say, firing brigades, air defense brigades, and maneuver brigades. So those are a couple.
Thanks. So one of the themes in this conference, of course, is AI and technology. Can we go through and talk a little bit about how you see AI and advanced technologies and uncrewed systems really changing things in each of your services, and the way you need to train and the opportunities. Replicator was mentioned, but that's obviously a key initiative. And could you talk a little bit about that, about how you're thinking about operational planning in different ways as a result of these new technologies? Admiral Kilby?
Sure. I guess I'd like to start with this effort called Task Force 59, and it was an effort led by then Vice Admiral Cooper, who was the Fifth Fleet commander, and it was an effort born out of necessity. He was platform poor. I don't know how else to say it, because we took a lot of the platforms that traditionally went to that geographic combatant commander area, and we were using them in other areas. So he used unmanned platforms, surface and air and undersea platforms, to conduct maritime domain awareness and sensing. And so to me, that's a harbinger for us to look at how we develop a hybrid fleet and do things more effectively and share across the Navy and the Joint Force what we learned from that. Admiral Aiken, our Fourth Fleet commander, is doing that now in Fourth Fleet, where he is an asset poor fleet commander as well. And he's looking at ways that he can monitor through the Caribbean island chain traffic, legal and illegal, and understand where that is, so have an opportunity to act in a much more effective manner than he could with traditional manned platforms. So I think creating this system where we can really get at what General Rainey talked about, pull from that common data source and act on it collectively as a joint force, is where we have to go. In my opinion, there's going to be an increasing interdependency on each of the services to understand what each other can do. We started talking about that with the Marine Corps. And traditionally, when we talk about the Marine Corps going to shore, which is our archetypal model, where we're going to use the Marine Corps to take a land feature. If you flip that switch, and as General Smith described, and use those mobile elements of the Marine Corps to be sensing and maybe provide targeting data to me in a very contested environment where I don't want to emit my radar, that's an opportunity. Similarly with the Air Force. If I'm going to develop a long-range weapon that I can't service with my organic radar from my ship or aircraft, I may need to rely on the Air Force, either from a manned platform or satellite or the Space Force, to provide that data needed to close that fire control loop. So I think that's the place that we're going to go and be drawn to, and we must do it together as a joint force.
General Rainey?
So I've said a couple times already, it's really all about the people, which is good news for the Joint Force, really good news for the Army, because that's really our number one asymmetric advantage that we have. So one thing I think is very important is we need to recruit, retain, and figure out meaningful career paths for the kind of technical expertise that we're going to need. And not, okay, you don't have to be good with your weapon anymore. You got to be a 0 and 1 person. I think it's both. I think every leader in the Army is going to have to increase their understanding of data and data-centric warfare. And then we will need some niche capabilities. So we've started some things, partnerships with some of the best universities to start developing uniformed experts, software factory down in Austin, partnered with our great teammates. They got some folks down there. So getting the people right, I think, is, if we don't do that, it's not going to matter whether we get the technology right. And then the other comment about AI, that I personally think we got a little bit of the quest for the aspirational blinding us to the doable, so a lot of people are trying to figure out what AI might do. I think we could be doing better of the things it is good at now and bringing that to bear. Knowing the amount of information that's knowable that is unknown by commanders on the battlefield is staggering, and the potential to bring the capability in its current state to bear, not to replace humans, but to enable our commanders, is something that we're working very hard on in the Army.
General Allvin. And also, I mean, I think a common theme has been the ability to integrate all of the knowledge the joint force has, and to ensuring that leaders understand the capabilities each of the services can bring to bear.
Yes. So first, I will give a couple words on what I believe AI and technology advancements can do for our Air Force. I think it's going to require an agility of mind and institutional agility to ensure that when we see the possibilities, we don't look at those possibilities as a way we can do the things we've done in the way we've done them, just do it better. We need to think about new ways. So when opening our minds to the idea of the general proposition that human-machine teaming will be, as a general enterprise, human-machine teaming can be a competitive advantage, but only if you think of it in the broadest scope of it. A lot of times we hear AI, it's going to replace, or it's going to be machines versus humans, when actually I don't see it actually being that. I see it, there's an opportunity for us, as Jim said, it's still a human endeavor, but let's maximize what the humans can do by ensuring that the machines can do what the machines can do and make each other better. And I think that is going to be some of the secret sauce. I believe central to our Air Force's future is human-machine teaming. So I think Secretary Kendall made a lot of press in the last couple of days because he got a ride on an instrumented F-16 that had some AI in it and went up against a crewed F-16, and it did very well. So we're working on the automation. As we're looking at leaning into human-machine teaming and developing these collaborative combat aircraft, we're trying to do three things in parallel, which sometimes we had done serially. The first is we developed a platform, and then sometimes after we develop the platform, we'll really tweak the autonomy on the platform itself. And then afterwards, we'll figure out how we're going to do the rest of the .mil-PF spectrum and how we're going to actually employ it and how we're going to base it, et cetera. We're doing those all at once now. So at the same time as we have just down selected to 2 contractors for our collaborative combat aircraft. In parallel, we were doing this, developing the autonomy that will be able to be put in these platforms will be able to leverage. We also are standing up an experimental operations unit to understand not only how we're going to base and sustain it, but to Jim's point, what are the new AFSCs that we need? What are the new skill sets that we need? Perhaps we're going to need to have skilled coders at the tactical edge to be able to take full advantage of it. So it's really about thinking about the way we've done our mission totally differently. And I think to the second part of your question about the joint piece, I think as we move forward, the price of munitions, exquisite munitions, will not go down. So there's a cost piece there, and the speed of the battle is not going to reduce. So those two things together means we have to make the best use of every piece of kit that each of us has. And so we now have the technology that enables us to do all the way almost down to battle management more at a joint level. Whereas now we have the CFAC and we have the CIFLIC and the CIFMIC who within their domains, they see to their part of the fight. Technology, I think right now is a bit ahead of culture. And we need to look at our service cultures and understand how we can best leverage that technology to understand what each of the different services bring to bear for the joint warfighting concept and align against that. Technology allows us to do that, but it's us humans that have to decide culturally we're going to lean into that.
So technology is driving opportunities for more interoperability.
Absolutely.
General Smith, could you comment also on the Marines' perspective on AI and technology, but also on overall, has training kept up with where you need to be to take advantage of these systems and these opportunities, not just for the Marines, but across the force? It also seems a common theme is ensuring that training actually keeps up.
Yeah, I would say that the training is key, as you know. The difficulty is with new systems that you need to get the systems into the schoolhouse at the same time you get them into the fleet. And if you don't have trained operators, then the first systems in the fleet are going to be operated by people who are doing discovery learning. And with the expense of our systems, that's a non-starter. So being able to energize your schoolhouse and do innovative ways to train on new systems using AI and using simulators is really key, because everything, when you light it off, when you turn on a radar, you're seeing. Everything that you use has an electromagnetic spectrum to it, and it's being covered ubiquitously from space. So the ability to train using a simulator in a closed environment that is truly closed, not open to the sensors that are out there, is truly key. Because on game day, should that day ever come, you want to throw a curveball at the adversary. You don't want them to know that you're throwing a 95-mile-an-hour fastball, because they can hit that. You want to be throwing a slider. You know, sorry for my baseball analogy, but I've been watching my Rangers, and they're continuing to disappoint me. But the game day analogy is important. We have to hide what we're doing, which is a challenge when we're dealing with our industry partners and we're dealing with Congress, who have a right to know how we're spending their money, but we can't do that in an open setting.
Do you have the resources you need to do the training at the level you need to be doing, not just the Marines, but all the services?
Yeah, I would say no. I would say that despite the size of the federal budget and the DoD budget, we have an unfunded priority list because, and I won't apologize for asking for it, because, you know, what's the life of 100 Marines worth? $1 more than we could ask for. I mean, there's no price you can put on 100 Marines or 100 sailors, 100 soldiers, 100 airmen, 100 guardians. So we're going to continue to work with Congress on our unfunded priority lists to get the things that we need into the hands of the warfighter.
Nadia, if I could if I could just have an interjection here on the training piece from a technology perspective. The Navy has a system that we call live virtual constructive training. That's how we term it, how we resource it, how we build a program, how we advocate for it. I think it's super important for the future. The Army has a series of periodic exercise called Project Convergence, and it gets at that interrelation between the services and really our joint and coalition partners as well. So the importance of having live virtual constructive training allows you to do things in an environment where you're not seen. I do not have to divulge my tactics, and I can do it in a manner where I can maintain currency and proficiency, which I need to do if I'm connecting with other services. So I've got to build that muscle memory. We learned this in the Navy in the 2014 timeframe with the advent of a program called Navy Integrated Fire Control Counter-Air, where now air platforms and surface platforms and air platforms and air platforms are connecting in a manner they hadn't before. But the ability to train and build crew proficiency is a key component of this, to have confidence, because it all comes back to the human piece. That's what the United States of America does exceptionally well: produce war fighters and train them to go execute the mission. So this is a key foundational part of our program that we have to fund across the board to have that capability so we can build that confidence in execution.
General Allvin.
Yeah, I apologize. I want to go back to, I didn't want to let this opportunity go by when we were talking about the value to the joint force and what we can be learning from each other. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't represent my sister service from the same department who couldn't be here today. I think that is one of the big transformations we need to understand. I think we're having a collective elevation of awareness. The United States Space Force is no longer a service provider that provides services. It is a warfighting service that is a warfighting domain. And I think as we understand more and more, you know, we've sat in J-Rocks together, and we have a greater appreciation of how fast the acceleration is of the importance and the centrality of what is happening from in and through space is going to be to all of our successes. And so that's one of those that we often, because it's not in our muscle memory, we often, when we think of it, we go, oh yeah, that's pretty important. But having that into our consciousness, because it also impacts some of the things that we do. If there are things that the Space Force wants to be able to upgrade and advance, it has an impact on each of our services, because we have the terminals and the things that have to interface with that. And so there are large impacts of the movement of the Space Force to a warfighting domain for all of our services. And I think the more we gain an appreciation for that, the better off we're going to be.
So I'd like to switch for a minute toward looking at allies and partners. You know, that's an added complicated dimension to this picture. So while technology is driving interoperability across our services, making our joint force potentially more lethal and communicate better, there's also a problem that I've read about a little bit about the different levels of where allies and partners are on some of these tech developments. and how having different levels across this landscape could actually make it harder in some ways for us to achieve the interoperability and integration we want. Are you concerned about that? I know it's also something that SCSP is really working on. They're doing a lot with allies and partners in terms of looking at technology and the impact on their forces.
Yeah, I'll start.
General Smith, yeah.
One, the default mechanism for classification, it can't be secret no foreign. It has to be secret yes foreign, because we always go for the easy button on classification, and you make it no foreign, and then you can't share with your allies and partners. We have lots of friends. Dr. Carter used to say that. We have lots of friends. The Chinese and the Russians, they buy their friends. We build our friends through partnerships and alliances. So we have to be careful about how we classify our data, because if you're going to share and have a true ubiquitous system across the globe, you have to start with how you classify your data. And you have to be willing to go out on a limb and share, realizing that some of it may be compromised, but that's just life. And I would say it starts there.
Yeah, we have a system in some ways that really is quite literally from the Cold War in terms of COCOM and the Warsaw Pact days, when issues related to technology transfers were quite different. General Allvin?
I couldn't agree more, and I would really want to foot stomp what the Commandant said, which is that the allies and partners, that there are challenges, but they are one of our best advantages, and they augment things that we can't do. They also represent, we're leading with our values, and that we have like-minded nations, and so the opportunity is actually there. Our constructs are outdated, but I mean, when we think of how we think of cyber defense in general in our networks, we've gone away from the fortress that you try and keep everyone out to sort of a zero trust, which means you can be more specific and pointed and direct, precise about the risk that you're taking with the accesses with the different nations on the classification of the data. That can be done. That, I think, is more of a bureaucratic and a policy hurdle than it is a technological one to do. But when you do that and you can meet your allies and partners where they are, that's an advantage. And the other thing is, now that we are starting to develop programs, integrating from the start, building it with the idea of, I'm going to architect this in a manner that allows us to make decisions that will enhance allied and partner operability or can protect in some levels. You can build an architecture like that. We just haven't largely up to this point.
General Rainey?
On the partner and ally thing, I think there's more opportunities with where technology is going. So for the Army land forces, integrating one of our great partners, Armor Brigade, into a U.S. Army division, it's unbelievably complicated and hard. You got to build an entire new stack of servers to create this mission partner environment, and we're doing it, and if we need to, we'll be able to do it. But if you go to data, it eliminates that entire need. I mean, if you have a really good network, the ability to extend that to a partner is as simple as somebody coding the access that you want as a commander. So I'm a little more optimistic. Project Convergence, our exercise, I think all the services, you don't see us doing anything that there aren't partners and allies that, part of, some more than others, for a lot of reasons. But if I could make an analogy that's real important to me, to the Army Futures Command, to all the industry folks out there, if you're in the Title 10 business, man, train and equip, provide ready forces to combatant commanders. I think as much as General Cavoli cares about the great NATO alliance, or the way our commanders out in the Pacific care about the countries that they're partners with, I think the analogy for us is industry. I mean, our ability as a service to partner and have meaningful win-win relationships with the best American companies, especially in the tech sector, it's not an option. I mean, just like we won't win a war in Europe without NATO, we're not going to out-transform our enemies without meaningful partnerships with the best American companies. And I personally have not asked a single one to help and been told anything other than yes. So I'd like to just commend them for that.
But also you hinted, I'll turn to Admiral Kilby, it's almost as if technology now provides us with an opportunity for new operational concepts around the problem of integration. Right? We thought about integration and we thought about how we integrate and work with allies and partners in a different way in the past, or elements. And today technology offers us, if we take the opportunity, a new approach to integration.
Yeah.
Just something to think about. Admiral Kilby?
I think I'll take a different strand. There's a lot of brass tacks hard work that has to happen to make this work. And that means an enduring relationship. In the Navy, over my career, when we pass another allied nation, we conduct what's called a PASEX, passing exercise. They can be very superficial. They can make us feel good, but they're not to the level of detail that we need to fight together. So we've engaged in an agreement with Australia and the UK called AUKUS. There's opportunity there. We've had a long-standing relationship with the UK that has 4 lines of efforts called the DCS, and there's a carrier cooperation effort, resulted in a very successful deployment of Queen Elizabeth with US and UK ships. We need to do that kind of thing routinely because there are just fundamental governmental differences that we got to be able to block and tackle our way through. And you just have to keep your eye on the ball to identify those things, root them out, and crush them, or they're gonna be enduring and they're gonna prevent you from getting where you want to go. So I think it's must-do work, and we have to continue to develop that beyond the superficial and really get into the details about what it's going to take to operate together.
And some of that goes to General Smith's point, right, about classification levels and obstacles that we could actually fix ourselves. They're not externally imposed, they're internally imposed. I read a report a couple of years ago which cited a figure that the UK spends about 1% of its defense budget on dealing with some of these basically paperwork obstacles related to classification and related to all of the obstacles of cooperating, working through our system. So that was an interesting statistic.
Yeah, and you just have to, not to belabor the point, but you just have to do it.
Right.
We deployed an F-35 squadron on the Queen Elizabeth. I mean, they were operationally attached to the British. They were operating in the skiff inside the Queen Elizabeth. We did it. We deployed and flew our F-35s off of the Queen Elizabeth. I mean, it's absolutely doable. You just have to get the people together and break down the barriers and get rid of the no foreign and go to yes foreign. And it is entirely doable when you have allies and partners, and we have a lot of allies and partners.
And just riffing off that a little bit, that effort has continued with the UK and will result in a deployment, we hope, in 2025 in the Indo-Pacific, where we can build on that, right? And not just achieve what we did, but build on it, where UK jets fly on a US big deck amphib ship and vice versa. So again, it's this idea that we keep advancing and holding ourselves accountable and not just conducting an exercise. That's not enough. We have to do more.
Yep.
Well, now I'll turn a little bit to everyone's favorite topic, our defense industrial base. I'll turn to Admiral Kilby first to comment a little bit on what he's seeing in terms of that industrial base, and especially with shipbuilding capacity, which, as many have pointed out, we're really lagging behind China. China has something like 200 times our shipbuilding capacity. So what concerns you about that? Obviously, probably a lot. What can the Navy do versus what it needs broader cooperation to really do?
Thanks for that question. Just succinctly, it does concern me. Now, we have a different model in the U.S. than China does from a government, industry relationship. So we can't really compare the two. It's not an accurate comparison. I do think we can advance here, and it's not just a shipbuilding business. It's weapons. It's pick your thing. We're seeing similarities between the challenges. So we need our procurement programs to deliver on time, on cost, and we need our platforms that go into maintenance to come out on time. And that will be a great advancement from where we are today, where we have maintenance delays and we have procurement delays, and it's just stagnating the system. The idea of developing this hybrid fleet, I think could create a bigger fleet. While it may not be tremendously bigger in numbers of capital ships, the composite of a hybrid fleet could be more effective in execution. And I'll use an example of the MQ-25, which is our unmanned tanker. It's the first unmanned aircraft we want to introduce with the air wing. Learning how to run the air wing with that unmanned tanker, not using F-18s with jet-to-be tankers will increase the life of those F-18s and increase our ability to extend power from an air perspective. So I think it's just pushing through the uncomfortable into that experimentation world, this hybrid fleet world where we can match these two together will be the opportunity space where we have some ability to kind of expand the effect that we have. But we are challenged. I am concerned about it. And we've got to collectively keep our eye on the ball here because we need our weapons and our ships on time as well as our aircraft.
Thank you. General Allvin?
Yeah, I think when we talk about the defense industrial base adapting, I think we need to adapt together. So I go back to when I was talking about it in the 90s when really defense industrial made that big change to where, for on the aerospace at least, largely 5 of the bigs, they call them, and that momentum, it moved apace until I believe it was in 1998 when there was the Lockheed Martin, I think, attempted merger of Northrop Grumman. And one of the things that came out in that conversation, that was Congress, disallowed that, and the Justice Department disallowed that. But I believe one of the things that the Grumman leadership had said was, hey, we're not sure that we have something that can compete. We just lost what was the F-35, the Joint Strike Fighter. And so this incentive structure that we had given to the aerospace industry about, these are going to be long-term commitments. These are going to be, and they're going to be big procurement programs. And so there's not going to be very many of them. And so it drove an incentive structure to where the companies would say, okay, I know I'm going to take a lot of loss early on, but I'm going to make it up in operations and sustainment. That became the business model. Not many of them could do that. So I think technology is allowing us, if we are willing to bureaucratically adapt to it, it's allowing us to shift that incentive structure. So that's what we're doing with our collaborative combat aircraft. We aren't designing it to be a 30-year platform. We want to start incentivizing design.
And then do you prefer bell to puck?
This is. Yeah. Okay. I didn't hear what that was, but that was a great heckling. But but we aren't building it with a large sustainment tail. The idea would be, because technology is moving so fast, we want many more competition to come in and say, well, I may not get selected for this particular design, but I know another one's coming around the corner, which is why we had increment 1 for our collaborative combat aircraft, and we had very strict key performance parameters. And then increment 2, we're already drawing the concepts up for. So we want to incentivize industry in a way that will allow us to move at the speed of technological advancement. So I think there's a way that we can also think about how we do things, holding our requirements fast and resisting the temptation to add one more ornament on the tree for another $20 million, et cetera, et cetera. And we get to that very long-term sunk cost theory. So I think we can be working together on that.
And the services can really drive those changes in the requirements process, right?
Absolutely.
General Rainey and then General Smith.
Yeah, well, great comments. And absolutely, it's concerning. Munitions, I would add, we've learned a lot about munitions and consumption rates, and I think the whole Joint Force, OSD, Congress, the Army, Mr. Bush, our acquisition executive, has done phenomenal work getting that back on the right path. Not there yet. Just to be a little bit different, I really personally don't like the term defense industrial base as much as I like the American industrial base.
I actually like the National Security Innovation Base.
That's a lot, but I'm with you. Because dual use, like the tech companies, there's like this tech patriotism thing happening right now. They're really good companies that I think we're going to need. And if you go back to, Freedom's Forge, the great story about it wasn't a bunch of big giant defense companies. It was the best companies in America, Ford, GM, RCA, General Mills. I think the next time, preferably before the next time we fight, but certainly if we get in a war with an existential threat, it's going to take the American industrial base to make us prevail. That kind of endurance just doesn't exist right now.
General Smith?
Yeah, there's no shipbuilders left. There's welders and there's steam fitters, but they're not shipbuilders, and they can be lured away by Harley Davidson to be a welder on motorcycles. They can be lured away by Honda or by Ford, and so there's very few, if any, true shipbuilders left. There's composite workers. And if you don't pay them a competitive wage and give them predictable work, which means, LHAs on 4-year centers, LPDs on 2-year centers, throwing my shameless shipbuilding pitch in there, then they're going to walk away. And some of what we do at the Pentagon and what comes from Congress disincentivizes people to stay in the military industrial complex. Because, why would you stay working at a company when you're going half the year without funding? And then you get all your funding in the second half of the year. It doesn't make sense. And you can go work at Ford or Harley Davidson or Honda and have steady, predictable work. So the collaboration with Congress to get our budgets out on time has a strategic effect on the workforce.
Okay. And I think there's right now nationally and bipartisanly, there's more and more focus on the importance of manufacturing supply chains, keeping manufacturing in this country, which could all be helpful to improving or strengthening our American industrial base.
Nadia, could I make a comment about software? I think the panel following us is going to talk about software and opportunities, among other things. I think we can do a better job introducing competition or allowing competition based on how we produce our programs. An example of that is the Aegis combat system. So Admiral O'Connell and PEO-IWS right now has been working for some time on a concept called the Forge, where I can bring in multiple people to compete in that same space and not have to be locked with one vendor. I think that's a very healthy idea to pursue. It's counter to the way we do business. It's counter to the way we fund programs. But I think we should leverage the strength of our country and think about ways to do that so we can build on that. And Aegis is much more flexible and adaptive than it once was, but there's opportunity to grow there, I think, across the board on all our programs.
Well, we've covered a lot of topics this morning, from interoperability to uncrewed systems to training to budgets a little bit. Before we close, I'd like to give everyone an opportunity to comment on a point that maybe you didn't have a chance to make, but that you'd like to make. General Allvin?
Thank you very much. And again, thanks for letting me sit with these brilliant gentlemen here and share the stage. I think I'll just say one real brief thing, and that is, I think what worries me the most is we can see the future that we need. And what we don't control is the speed of what the potential adversary is doing. And so my constant concern is that while we see it, are we going to be able to execute on time? So we talked about Freedom's Forge, and we sort of have the warm blanket of seeing in the past that the arsenal of democracy saved the day. And I'm hoping that it will again, but taking accountability into account this, I believe, unprecedented speed of how things can turn, will we be able to do that? And that's why having us on the balls of our feet, we get a lot of things. I think one of the biggest markups that we hate from appropriators when they say early to need. So money goes away. There's nothing early to need about having ourselves the best prepared, even if we are not going to spend the money today or going to do that manufacturing today. I worry that we aren't doing all the things necessary to where when that catastrophic event or potential catastrophic event happens, we can react in time because everything's moving faster.
And we need, just to emphasize that point, we need to inject time as a component of strategy.
Amen.
And to know upfront as leaders, you need to be able to ask the question, how long is something going to take? And we have the data now to answer that question across the board. General Smith?
Well, I would close, perhaps not answering your question, but instead.
We're in Washington.
Yep, answer the question you want. Instead, thanking you for narrating this panel and for this conference. I worked for Dr. Carter twice as his senior military assistant when he was the DepSecDef and then the SecDef. He was a brilliant man. He was committed to and dedicated to the betterment of the Department of Defense and to keeping America safe and to keeping America secure. And that is our secret sauce, because we have people like the gentleman sitting on this stage. We have people like Dr. Carter who literally give their lives and commit their lives from being AT&L to being DepSecDef to being SecDef, who are committed to keeping us out of war, and if we go to war, committed to keeping us on top. And so I would just leave it there and thank you and thank Stephanie Carter for putting this together in Dr. Carter's name.
Thank you. General Rainey?
Yeah, just thank you. That was great. Sure. I can't do better than that, but for the family, I was of the generation that was in harm's way, at the user end, like all of us, and lives were saved because of the way he led and approached his job and the sense of urgency. A lot of people benefited, are very grateful, and I'm honored to be included in this. Yeah, I'm a little more optimistic. It doesn't sound like it sometimes, but there are real problems, and we got some stuff, but we're figuring it out. There's a clear understanding of all these things. We didn't reveal any secret need to transform faster or fix some processes. The department's got some great efforts, DIU, all the services, Army Futures Command. We're experimenting together. We're going to figure it out. Nobody has seen the United States joint force when we fight together and the way we fight with the quality of equipment, but especially the humans we have. So a lot of the observations that people are seeing happening in horrible things going on in the world, I would just say you need to ask, what is different between the way those two people are fighting and the way the U.S. joint force, backed by the whole of government. So we got some threats, but we are still the premier joint force in the world, and our people and our ability to fight together is still deterring people, I think. And the U.S. industrial base, China's building more ships, somebody's building more planes. The U.S. dominates the tech innovation. The best companies in the world are wholly American, and as long as they come with us on this journey, I feel pretty good about where we're at.
Admiral Kilby, are you as optimistic?
I am. I think there's an opportunity for us to continue in our own respective services, press down and develop our talent at a more junior level and force them to integrate at a level that maybe they haven't in the past. I use Nellis and Fallon, Nevada as an example. If we can press down build that expertise across the joint force at a younger level, it will just continue to provide the opportunity that I think the panel laid out here. So I am optimistic, but we've just got to keep the pressure on and use the strength of our country, as General Rainey laid out, in a manner where we are openly welcome to the industry to come in and help us figure that out. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Well, it's always nice to end a panel in Washington on a note of optimism, nice and a little bit rare. So let's take that. And thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks.